Louisiana versus all y'all. Jarrett Roser here today with the assistant managing editor over sports of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the lovely Tyler J. Batiste from Northside, Lafayette, and LSU, as you see over his left shoulder, our right shoulder, and, very established somehow journalist in this country at this point. And a guy who somehow is one of my best friends. So what's up, man? How's everything been going?
It's going, man. It's you didn't pull out that mug before we started talking. It's nice. No, it's good. It's like everybody else trying to get through this pandemic and obviously societal wide situation that we're all going through in terms of opening up and masks and all that other stuff. So, just trying to survive. How about you, man? I was wondering what kind of what color shirt you were going to wear. I was going to try to pair it with mine. I didn't go with it. I just kind of went with a neutral color. I tried to match your blinds over there. I knew they would be in this color range, but maybe next time we can pair up a little better on the shirt situation.
Yeah, I've been trying to match the shirts to the schools or teams or whatever of the folks that I'm talking to. And for you, I guess somewhat it ends up being LSU colors. It's probably thrown off a little bit by the light, but also I wore this shirt in Pittsburgh and people thought it was a black and yellow and not a dark purple and yellow. And so it covered a couple bases. So, versatile.
Well, that worked out.
Yeah. So you mentioned it's such strange times right now. There's so much going on in so many aspects, and I want to kind of get to some of that and talk about your role, which is one of a very underrepresented amount of Black journalists, particularly in management roles, and the importance of that diversity in the newsroom, not just racial, but just diversity in general of those voices within media. I told you, I figured the first time we called might get kind of goofy and funny, and we'd be talking about all kinds of wildness, but there's so much serious to talk about in terms of kind of introducing you and your journey to where you are now and your experience, and then some serious topics. So I don't think we're going to get into listing Eddie Murphy movies or Prince albums or whatever the case may be just yet. But for you've had an interesting journey to where you are just professionally, where we work together in the sports department of the Daily Reveille at LSU, and then you go to the copy editing design side down in Houma, Thibodaux, and then have worked your way back through Delaware and to Pittsburgh, where you had an internship when we were in school and are now in a management position on the content and sports side of things. When you look at where you are now and having a big role at a major metro and kind of the not what we would have considered the clear path when we were a couple of idiots in the basement of Hodges Hall in Baton Rouge, what's it been like to get to where you are now, and what kind of stands out to you about that path so far to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned my timeline, so I'm not going to get into all that, but I think one of the things, not to sound like I'm overconfident or anything, but I think betting on yourself is something that you just kind of have to do if you want to get to where you want to be, if that makes sense. I left sports twice through the course of the past 11 years, coming out of college, and then when I first came to Pittsburgh, I left the sports editor position to work in sort of the online news realm. Had in the back of my mind that maybe one day I'll get back into sports again. I didn't think it would be, 2 or 3 years down the line like it ended up being, nor did I think my first job out of college would be kind of in the copy editing design realm. It's funny, a lot of people, we had job fairs and different things when we were in college, and the reason that I was aware of the job down at the Courier and Comet in Houma, Thibodaux was a mutual friend of ours, Daniel, who was working down there. Kind of just mentioned, hey, we're looking for like a copy editor who's a pretty good editor who knows grammar and is familiar with AP style. Like, does anybody ring a bell? And I kind of looked at Daniel. I was like, me? Like I'm graduating soon. I know those things. And so coming out of college, it was kind of a situation where do you want to, freelance and try to, get a couple of sports gigs in hopes of getting in the sports full time, or do you want to take a job where you're making the big bucks at $28,000-$29,000 a year or whatever it was. And so I took that job, and then, like I said, kind of bet on myself, hoping that I could get back into sports one day. And luckily I've been able to do that not only one time, but twice. So it's been an unconventional career path. I've never been a traditional beat writer or a columnist in my professional career. But the analogy that I've used on several occasions with whether it be students or interns or different organizations is that the greatest NFL coach of all time is Bill Belichick. Arguably the greatest NBA coach is Greg Popovich, and neither of them ever played a single play in the sports that they're great in. Bill Belichick never played in the NFL. Popovich never played in the NBA. So I don't think you necessarily have to. While it's a good thing, I don't think you necessarily have had to have been a writer or a columnist or a features writer or whatever the case may be to know what makes a good story, to put people, excuse the cliche, but in positions to be successful, in positions to win, and to create not only a good staff, but a good department, and just kind of work well with other people. So I think I've been able to do that over the past decade.
Yeah, you play okay with others. I'll give you credit on that. And also don't undersell yourself as a hell of a volleyball beat writer with Coach Fran Flory and company back in Baton Rouge. Every time I see Coach, she wants me to send love your way and make sure we're staying out of trouble.
I'll take, man, the volleyball, LSU volleyball teams of 06 and 07, they were good. And it's weird being, a decade plus down the line, like to just see those people who you kind of interacted with on a semi-professional level, to now, being Facebook friends with them, Instagram, just discussing other topics that aren't related to sports or whatever, how you knew that person back a decade ago. But I always have love for the volleyball team down there. So, Coach, if you're watching this, hello. I hope you're doing well. If you're ever in Pittsburgh, let me know.
Certainly some great connections from the days covering those athletic programs on campus, and I've obviously had a chance to stay pretty close to LSU athletics through the years. And you mentioned kind of something that our other friend, your friend Amos Morale III, and I discussed a couple of weeks ago, was just kind of the need for some versatility, and you've shown that through your career. And I think some of that is stuff that we learned from one of our mentors back in school, Jay Shellady, who was the director of student media. And so you learned both some versatility in journalism as well as gambling when you say you bet on yourself from Jay. And I always remember you hadn't been down in Houma, Thibodaux that long when the opportunity to take the lead role in that room down there with the copy editors and designers. And I remember it was something that was mentioned to you, and there was a level of uncertainty from you because you had only graduated from LSU not long before. And there was just kind of that unease of, man, am I ready to do this sort of thing? And a little bit of doubt there for a second. And should you take it? And I asked, man, do you think you can do that job? Like, I think the skill set, and you're like, yeah, I mean, I feel good about being able to do it. I just don't know if I just feel like I'm still such a young idiot in a lot of ways, like fresh out of college. And so I thought that was a really, as early as it was, an interesting juncture for you to realize that we were kind of viewing ourselves in this way that weren't giving ourselves enough credit at times for the preparation we had, because when you thought about it from a, can I do that job and do it well, you realized, yeah, I can do that, and took a big step pretty early, and
yeah,
it kind of started some more of this path.
Yeah, a couple things on what you just said. Number one, I learned a lot of things from Jay Shellady. I still don't know how to tie a bow tie, even though he tried to teach us one time.
Oh.
I think I remembered for like maybe a day or two, and I couldn't do it right now.
I'm sloppy as hell with. I wish I could tie a bow tie cleanly, but it's ugly.
Yeah. So
What
I just
at one point, Jay tried to help me tie one of his ties onto me, and I left it on for about 2 days because I knew I couldn't tie it back as cleanly.
uh, so that's a skill I still need to learn at some point. But yeah, I mean, I remember having those conversations with you too. Like you said, I graduated from LSU in May of 2009. I started in Houma a week or so later. I remember there was a weekend between where we had a pretty good time in New Orleans during that time in between where we're not going to get into that, but it was fun times. I'll put it that way. And so I think I started the day after Memorial Day down in Houma, and then by Halloween I was kind of in the lead position overseeing their copy desk. I mean, I had that uncertainty, and that's kind of part of that is being young. Another part of that is just kind of a personality trait of mine. You know, I am kind of non-committal and laissez-faire about certain things. But once I commit to something, and once I say, yeah, we're going to do this, or yeah, I mean, I'm, you know, as you know, I'm gung ho about it. So it was just kind of the early stages of, should I do this? Should I not? And that's how I feel about picking a restaurant to eat, or just other various things in my life. But once I'm committed, I'm all in 100%. So, but yeah, it was an interesting time. And then, you know, working with those people down there, you learn a lot. But I learned pretty quickly that, you know, I love them to death, but I learned that for a lot of people, it was just kind of a job for them and not necessarily a career. You know, a lot of those people, you knew that they weren't striving to go to a bigger media market or a bigger publication. You know, they either had family there or, you know, had other things that they were concerned with, and you knew that they were going to be there for a while doing a really good job, but there wasn't a whole lot of sometimes aspiration to go elsewhere, which is what I had. You know, shout out to Houma and Thibodaux, but you know, I never thought I was going to be working there for 10 or 15 years. You know, I kind of wanted to take further steps in my career. So luckily I was able to do that.
And there were stretches, I guess, early in your career, whether it be when you were in Houma Thibodaux or once you'd gotten up to Delaware, where I know we wondered what the opportunities might be like for you to come back even closer to home, potentially be in a Lafayette, Baton Rouge, or New Orleans. And then there was a point when you ended up in Pittsburgh and things kind of fell into place in such a cool way for you to be in a city that you had obviously really appreciated your time there during college. And your mom and I at lunch one day just kind of look at each other and think, you know, he's probably not coming back anytime real soon at this point. So for you on the flip side of things, as someone that has obviously had a lot of pride in your background and love for Louisiana and always have a great time coming back home to visit, what has it been like to branch out that far, be out in the Northeast and have really a second home that is a place that you feel so comfortable and have been able to leave such, to make such a mark and have such success there, and kind of balance that longing for home with that love for home number two?
Yeah, it's weird. You know, I had a realization maybe a year or so ago that Pittsburgh is the longest place I've lived other than Lafayette. You know, like I said, I always have love for back home. Most of my family's there, save for a few people in you know, Texas and California. You know, I when I was younger, I kind of always had the idea of maybe trying to get back home, closer to home. But once you meet, you get comfortable elsewhere. Once you get comfortable with, you know, friends and other people who are you know, kind of in your life now, that kind of not completely goes away, but it kind of gets pushed to the back burner a little bit. And then obviously having professional success doesn't hurt that thing at all. You know, it's weird. I think, like you mentioned, I had an internship in Pittsburgh. And actually when I came back from that internship is when we first met, you know, the summer of 2007. I showed up late to Reveille training and was coming back from my internship. And so I was 19 going on 20 that summer. So it was good to have a familiarity with Pittsburgh when I came here. You know, I think if this was a city that I wasn't familiar with at all, where I didn't have at least a couple of friends or spend some time, maybe maybe it would be different, but having that kind of familiarity, when I was 19 and 20, and then coming back here when I was, 26, 27, that certainly helped me ease into things, and it's helped that comfort that I've felt here for the past 6 years.
Yeah, you were able to find a strapping young man of Italian descent who has a wide range of musical taste and a almost unparalleled love for 90s NBA throwbacks jerseys, and so I don't know where like our friend Ellen Zelinsky Whitfield asked me recently when I mentioned Sean. She said, where does he find these people? Like, I don't understand how he links up with y'all and just locks in.
I don't know. I guess I have a type of friend, dark haired 90s NBA jersey wearing sports fans of Italian descent is just kind of like my friendship wheelhouse, it seems. I don't know. So
it's your sweet spot.
Yeah. And coincidentally, now Sean's dad lives in Baton Rouge, which is just not only in Baton Rouge, but in the same complex as you, which is just the weirdest sequence of events. People say, oh yeah, it's a small world, but that's really, really weird.
Yeah. When we saw each other on one of my first couple days of furlough from LSU Global and Charlotte Education this spring, and I was asking Sean how many people he knew that lived in Louisiana. He said, well, 2, and it happens to be the 2 people that are comfortable enough going down to opposite ends of the pool right now while it's closed and kind of shouting at each other across the way as we get some summer sun. It's small world for sure. Particularly when you were still in Louisiana and a little bit closer and able to visit Baton Rouge more frequently and be here on weekdays, and also when Jay was still on campus every day before he finally followed through with his retirement after about 10 years of claiming it was going to happen. We would go talk to a lot more manship mass comm classes, and it seemed like students would consistently ask what the biggest challenges were, or what was an aspect that was most frustrating about our jobs. And at that point, I think we talked a lot about the schedule dynamics and just kind of the difficulty managing typical or more normal life routines with other people on those routines because of working so many nights and weekends. As your career has continued to develop, and obviously you've had a lot more responsibility on your plate, had to deal with a lot of different situations, and also some of your perspective has broadened as you've continued. How do you look at that question now? What are some of the things that some of these high school or college journalists just getting started trying to figure things out might not realize, or things that have been kind of some of your biggest challenges or opportunities for growth?
Well, I think it's the thing that you mentioned. It's the schedule, especially if you're a sports journalist. It's nearly like it's impossible to be a good sports journalist without working nights and weekends consistently. That's when the games happen. That's when news breaks. It's not a simple thing where you can where you're working a 9 to 5 and then you can just clock out and everything will be fine. And I think non-journalists understand that too, right? Like you see news breaks on Twitter, at midnight or early in the morning, whatever the case may be. And to be really good at it, you have to be flexible, and you have to kind of, make those sort of sacrifices. I think when I was younger, I was a little more eager to kind of quote unquote, sacrifice certain things from a personal perspective to kind of be, all in on your work and your career and things like that. And as you kind of get older, I'm not sure when this is going to come out, but I turned 33 in a few days from the time that we're recording this. You kind of have more perspective in terms of not everything is about work. You kind of want to have that work balance, and not you realize that it's not the most important thing. If a story doesn't get up immediately and there's like a 5 or 10 minute lag, it's not going to be the worst thing in the world. Like, you don't want to have that be you don't want to have that be like a regular occurrence, but you have to take into account your personal life and your personal experiences as well. But yeah, being a sports journalist, news happens all the time, and and especially if when you're an editor, you have to be ready to kind of go to work when you know a story, needs it. Like an example that comes to mind, we talked about our buddy Sean earlier last March. Sean and I were, out at dinner and having like a beer when Antonio Brown got traded to the Raiders, which obviously was a huge deal here in Pittsburgh. And it happened around midnight local time, which is only about 9:00 out in when they were Oakland at the time. Now, obviously, they're in Las Vegas, which I guess is still the same time zone. But, like you think about, I left immediately. I cashed out, paid for my dinner. I went home and I started contacting a reporter. And that was a story that needed my attention at that time because I knew how important that was from a news perspective, not only in Pittsburgh, but from the National Football League and sports world as a whole. Our guys were the ones who broke the initial story of Antonio Brown skipping practices and being benched for the 2018 season finale against the Bengals. So, that isn't something that a normal person would do, right? Oh, I got to go to work for an hour at midnight after having 2 beers. You gotta do it, and you gotta be available. Also, you have to know when to kind of delegate things and let other folks carry some of the workload for you.
And your birthday, as you mentioned, is Saturday, July 11th. I was hoping to be up there if it had presented itself in such a way for me to take the road trip that we're looking at taking the tail end of July. And I was hoping to turn this into a little bit of a virtual birthday party almost. Again, before I realized that we're probably going to get into some more serious topics, and maybe I don't need to make cupcakes to show you that you can't eat or whatever anyway. But I think it's great that you mentioned you're somehow only going to be 33. I'm sure a lot of folks watching were thinking much older. So that was a nice way to slide that in.
I hate you.
That's not true. I think I'm a great example where you were talking about earlier how sometimes you can be a little bit hesitant at first, but then when you commit, you commit. And
yeah,
because here we are, years later, and this however long we've been on this video call now at this point is a normal thing.
Yeah. This is gonna actually be shorter than a FaceTime session. But it's once I waver a little bit in the beginning, but once I'm in, I'm all in, and yeah, that has happened with us as well. My mom loves me. I think my mom loves me. I know she loves you, which is kind of a sad thing to say about your own parent, but
that's all right. My mom probably likes you more than she likes me right now too, somehow.
Yeah.
And I think we're both comfortable with these situations more than the bartenders at Daiquiri Supreme in Lafayette are, because it really the girls seem to struggle hearing some of these dynamics. But when you look at this year, I mean, we talk about the schedule challenges and whatnot within journalism, and particularly sports journalism. But I wanted to talk to you some about the overall dynamics. We're at a time when a lot of social justice and civil rights type topics are back at the forefront of conversation in a way that they probably haven't been in at least 3 or 4 years, if not decades. And for you as again, I'll say some people would consider youngish Black journalist in a position of responsibility and management, how do you view your role, whether it be on the sports side specifically or just your role in a management team at a major newspaper, knowing that these are some pretty pivotal times, and also that voices of minorities in those roles are so underrepresented, really coast to coast within the industry, and again, not just minorities, but non-white men. There's kind of an underrepresentation of voices of people who don't look like me. How do you view your roles or responsibility within your team and within the industry?
I think it's important, but it's also important to remember that, there's only so much that one person can do, right? I'm only one voice. No matter what room I'm in, from a personal or professional standpoint, I'm only one person. So I can't speak for the entire race of Black journalists or people from Louisiana or whatever the case may be. But I can contribute something to those conversations. And that's what I, kind of hope to do day to day. I know that I can't make any, some decisions are out of my hands from a, sports journalism standpoint, but at least being able to be kind of a voice in those various rooms and those various avenues, I think is extremely important. And yeah, it's a very underrepresented, group of people when it comes to sports journalists. I think, there were some statistics that were out recently where, I think it was like 85 or 90% of sports journalists are white. And then even less, obviously, you get into not only racial minorities, but men compared to women. It's just not a whole lot of diversity there. And obviously that's racial diversity. That doesn't get into like, the economic or geographic type things, which I think are important as well. But, I try to be as helpful as I can to, other young journalists, NABJ, there's a mentor program that I try to participate in. I was the first time this past year. I admittedly didn't do as well as I would have liked, but hopefully going forward, that's kind of a more regular thing that I could be a part of. APSC, the Associated Press Sports Editors Group, being a part of the diversity committee and reached out to various student groups around the country and just trying to ask journalists, how can we be of a sense with how can we grow this? We recently had the national APSC summer conference a couple of weeks ago, and obviously this is something that had been planned. The way the leadership stacks up, this had been planned for years out. But Lisa Wilson, who's been a great mentor and sounding board for me, oversees the NFL national NFL coverage for The Athletic, took over as APSC president a couple of weeks ago, and I think she's the first Black female president of the APSC organization. There's been a lot of stories written about her, not only by APSC but by another LSU grad, Kennedy Landry, did something for SJI recently that just kind of profiled Lisa in her role as just kind of an important voice, not only in for Black journalists but female journalists as well. And I'm really excited to see kind of what happens over the next year with her at the helm in terms of diversity outreach and things like that. So I think it's extremely important, and it's fun to it's fun to be that, kind of be the person that other people, I don't want to say look up to, but it's nice to have someone who kind of looks like you be in a position where that you strive to be in. I know, I didn't have a whole lot of that when I was in school. Not a lot of, Black sports editors around. I know you worked with Marcus down at the Times-Picayune for a little while. I don't know Marcus that well, but I imagine, that there were people who kind of saw him in that position and thought, okay, if he can do this, then I can as well. And hopefully I can be that for one or two people down the road. Not only down the road, but hopefully I have been that for one or two people in the past few years.
Yeah, you mentioned some great people who either have been mentors for us in terms of Lisa and Marcus, or Kennedy, who's obviously finishing up her time at LSU now and venturing out into the professional world in just strange times to try to get started with it as a new college graduate.
Yeah,
you mentioned NABJ too. Shout out to Gregory Lee Jr., the president there, another New Orleans guy, and being a big figure within that organization, which the convention will be coming up in a virtual setting this year because of everything going on. So a lot of great contacts there in a lot of different directions, both a few years ahead of us and a few years behind.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg's a good guy. I'd been in contact with him a few times, but I met him down in last year's APSC conference, which was in Atlanta. I think was the first time that I actually met him face to face. And we tried to link up in Austin for the LSU Texas game. He was down there with Mark Spears, and we unfortunately wasn't able to happen because As you know, I was staying like way outside in the suburbs, and everybody else was in the city, and it just didn't work out. But yeah, he's a real good, much like Lisa, a real good sounding board to have, and a good person to just kind of get out there and share these job opportunities for these young people that they might not see otherwise. The power of social media and things like that are can't be overstated. Like, sometimes you might not see something unless somebody retweets it, and that person retweets something else, and then that person retweets it, and then it gets into the viewpoint of somebody who might not have seen it otherwise. So, that's always a good thing, and he's a good resource to have, definitely.
Social media, the best and worst thing simultaneously, depending on how someone's using it. For you guys you mentioned kind of some of the bigger picture, just networking and association resources and stuff like that. For you guys in kind of a day-to-day role as your sports team in Pittsburgh, with the amount of conversation that's happening in a very big national way across the board, how have you kind of viewed the intersection of these big social issues within sports? Because it obviously is something that affects a huge number of athletes, because as much as we talk about the small amount of representation in sports journalism, there's a part of the problem with that is that the representation of the actual sports world that we're covering is largely people of color. And so when you try to cover that from a sports journalism standpoint, what are some of the things that you kind of have in mind, or you work with your team in terms of ways to appropriately cover that intersection?
It's tough sometimes. You kind of have to look at things from a 30,000 foot view, right? Like it's tough in the day to day, especially the past few months when there haven't been a whole lot of actual live sporting events, that you've kind of had to every single day think about, okay, what are we going to write today? What are we going to turn around? There's nothing really going on. You kind of have to stretch that out over the course of days or weeks or months. So recently it's been a little tough to kind of step back and like look at everything as a whole and say, okay, like what are we missing here? And that's something I wish I was a little bit better at. Like I'm a fan of kind of the grind, and I like the the day-to-day stuff. And sometimes I could be a little personally at just kind of taking a step back and looking at everything as a whole. I think we do a good job of that. I mean, we won a triple crown honor from APSC last year, which is kind of a when you get top 10 honors in 3 of the major 4 categories that they do for their contest. And we competed against some organizations that are much larger than us, the Washington Post, New York Times, Los Angeles Times. So that's something I'm really proud of, especially because we had so much staff turnover last year. That to be able to recruit and build a staff that has that kind of success and looks at those issues is important. We've got a story, going up tomorrow morning on, some of the Pittsburgh players who are part of the National Women's Soccer League. Megan Klingenberg, who's a defender for the U.S. Women's National Team, and she's a defender for the Portland team in NWSL, and she's been one of the people who have been at the forefront of just kind of this push for not only respect but for social change, social justice. And she's from up around this area. So I think it's having people on staff who think about those things, and you don't want to push your own opinions on your staff. I don't want everybody on my staff to think the way I do about certain things, but as long as people are asking themselves questions about whether whether this is the right way to approach a certain story, or whether we're missing different aspects of a story, I think that takes time. But I think over time, just working with people, that you kind of are able to kind of build that sort of culture. One of our reporters, New Bias Wilborn, has been doing a lot of different podcasts recently with, had done stories or done interviews with him and TikTok videos and things like that. He's kind of a voice of he played football at Penn State, which is about 2 hours from here, and they have the sort of thing maybe we would have done if of just kind of building that culture and having people think, just not, I don't want to say question their beliefs, but just think about what they're doing as opposed to just kind of doing the same thing that you might have done all the time 5, 10, 15 years ago. And I think as long as those wheels are kind of spinning in your head, as a whole, that's a good process to go through on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think about that a lot with some of the conversations that we're having in terms of I feel like we analyze so much so extensively, and I feel like speaking for myself, that I really spend probably more time than necessary sometimes thinking about why I think a certain thing and why I'm approaching something a certain way and what has made me view things a certain way. And I think some of that piece gets lost on a lot of people. And that's kind of one of the most important things right now is just listening to perspectives and understanding why we are where we are, why you think what you think, how someone else thinks the way they think, and just kind of taking that moment to have the conversation, because we mentioned social media as being such a positive or negative tool. So much of the conversation just devolves into shouting at one another and not listening, which is the opposite of what anyone really should be, or I think in most cases is pushing for at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I had to take is it one of those DISC assessment type tests a few years ago for kind of an intra office leadership thing I was going through at the time, and it it takes like what your personality traits are, like if you're like analytical or impulsive and those sorts of things, and the the one I took could not have been closer to the truth of just like my own personal. It was like one of the analytical. I was smack dab in the middle of like the thinking things through kind of. As you know, I'm not very rarely in my, and it goes back to the personality traits of earlier. I'm not really an impulsive person to where like, yep, we got to do this. I can waver and think things through and look at them from every single angle, which is a good thing. I think a good quality to have as a manager. But you also have to have somebody to balance that out, whether it be above you or below you, or somebody on staff to kind of say, this isn't the time to think this through. Like, we have to jump on this now, or we have to pursue this or start this project now. Like, you're going to overthink it if you keep doing that. And, that's not only for journalists, but just in general. Like, you kind of have to have that balance in your own, maybe not your own head, but your own life, to kind of have the yin and the yang, so to speak.
Yeah, not to get too personal, but how frustrating does that get for people sometimes when it seems like you're overthinking so much that it's almost like you're being negative by asking all those questions and trying to get that full picture? Because I know I run into issues where I start to ask questions and people think that I'm trying to tear it down, and I'm really just trying to think out the different possibilities and tangents and directions.
Yeah.
So it is good to have somebody to kind of push it forward sometimes and not get stuck in the way I think both of us occasionally do.
Yeah, it's funny because you kind of learned that trait as I mentioned my time in Houma Thibodaux earlier, where obviously the staff in Houma and Thibodaux is not as big as a staff as a paper the size of Pittsburgh, but our editor down there, that was one thing he would always ask, and it makes you question yourself. Like, we either pitch a story or pitch a certain project or do something related to whatever's going on in the workday, and he would just say, how do we know that? And it would get annoying when you're in the moment. You're like, oh, come on, like, what are we doing? But that's a really good thing to kind of ask yourself when you, especially in the world of social media, where all these reports and all these different rumors are always out there. Just stepping back for 10 seconds and asking yourself, okay, how do we know that? How do I know that? How do we know that's the case? How do we know that's what's happening? And you'll be surprised and where that could lead, whether it's a completely different story than the one you had, or whether it's not doing a story and then come to find out everybody did something that was incorrect, but because you questioned yourself in the beginning, you don't look like an idiot. So that's a good practice for any prospective journalists out there that might be watching.
And also, if you could, next time you and my mom are chatting, if you could teach her that kind of 10-second evaluation of what the heck's going on and whatnot, I'd appreciate that.
I will not do that. No.
Man, so I don't know how much deeper to really get into some of it. It's obviously a very critical piece of journalism at all times, but right now under these times where we're dealing with all of the just social impacts across the board, and we're looking at everything obviously with the coronavirus and just different conflicting information, misinformation. There's so many aspects of life right now that some of these things really play into beyond just racial components or men and women and representation and sexual orientation, whatever the case may be, that it's so critical to have all those voices in play. And I feel like there was so much more goofy stuff that I really wanted to get into with you. I think I had a pear for the first time in my life recently, and I had wanted to talk to you about that. I've been saving that up, but it seems so off the wall now.
You ate a pear?
I ate a pear.
You ate it. Well, you can't just bring it up and not talk about it. It's good for you, man. I'm proud of you.
I thought you'd appreciate that. I've always liked fruit, even when I was a little bit more hesitant on vegetables as a late teen, early 20.
You did not. Yeah, you didn't like salads when we were muck in Baton Rouge back in the mid 2000s.
Running amok.
Yeah. I, as you know, am a very pro salad. Have always been pro salad. You were not on that side of the spectrum, but now you're just a.
I was hesitant, but then I committed in a big way. I really wanted to let you know about the pear thing though, because it was a fruit that had thus far eluded me. And then immediately 2 or 3 days later, I felt the need to obviously have a second pear just so I could walk around saying two pear in the Air Force Ones.
Naturally, yeah. What's next on your fruit list? Like, what fruit are you going to have next that you haven't had?
I don't know. What fruit have I not had? I feel like I'd had.
I don't know. I didn't know you didn't have a pear, but apparently.
Neither did I until I had a pear.
Yeah. You know what's good? Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are they get a bad rap when you're a kid, but they're fantastic. Put a little bit of bacon on them.
Oh, yeah. You put a little bit of bacon on anything.
Put bacon on anything, yeah.
I've had conversations with people both in person and through the glory of social media on both Brussels sprouts and avocado and the level of glow up that they've had. Brussels sprouts coming from a very low place because you're kind of that's the scapegoat of like childhood entertainment. When you're growing up and you see a kid on TV who doesn't want to eat a vegetable, it's Brussels sprouts like 8 out of 10 times. And then you get older and you're like, oh, what are they doing with these Brussels sprouts, man? They're doing wonderful things these days. Avocado, I don't think ever started that low, but at some point I do think we reached the golden age of the avocado that we're now living through.
It's just a really big, and you might not be big of a pro wrestling fan as me, but just a huge face turn by Brussels sprouts. Like they over the course of time, they're just, love them. Love them.
Did you say I might not be as big of a pro wrestling fan as you?
Well, yeah. I don't know why I said it that way. You definitely are not. Yeah. As in you don't care at all, and I care a great deal.
I pretty much know Ric Flair. I know of Ric Flair.
Because of pop culture, not wrestling.
Yeah, they reference him a lot in sports celebrations and rap music. So
yeah, he's good, man.
Woo!
I'll put together 3 or 5 matches for you to watch, and just at least you can have an idea to have as a conversation starter about Ric Flair. If anybody's like, oh yeah, that match against so and so, great. You can, I'm
trying to meet a young lady at the bar. Oh yeah, the Ric Flair match.
Yeah, the 92 Royal Rumble, fantastic. That match against that match where he won the title.
Here we are, man. Happy early birthday.
Hey, thank you, friend.
And so we've come full circle back to the ridiculousness, and appreciate you. Next time will be less serious, all clownery, or running amok, as you say.
Yeah, I think we should just do this weekly. I'll just whatever.
Yeah, I mean we can
recurring thing.
You can become a recurring guest. I think a lot of folks are intrigued by the amount of time that we spend on FaceTime and wonder how the heck we carry a conversation for as long as we do. And so this provides somewhat of a taste that it may be shocking to folks that have made it this long, but this is a little bit more structured than what we're used to.
Yeah, we went from diversity to Brussels sprouts in 3.5 minutes, which is that's nothing.
There's the whole 6 or 7 degrees of separation, Kevin Bacon, and we're pretty much just 2 degrees from bacon at any given moment, and it kind of ties everything together.
Speaking of, I'm gonna send you. You mentioned Greg Lee. I'm gonna send you a bacon tweet that he had recently. So we're tying all sorts of things into this conversation. But hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and I'm honored to be here, and I'm proud of you for doing your thing and being the voice of high school sports in Louisiana, and Louisiana versus all y'all, and repping the brand and all that good stuff. And I'll tell your mom you said hello next time we talk.
Sounds good, man. I appreciate all of that, and just trying to do what I can with it. So thank you for joining me. You guys keep up the great work up there in Pittsburgh. Keep it warm-ish for me until I do get a chance to come back and make a triumphant return visit. And
I thought it was going to be this month. It wouldn't.
I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be this week. I thought I was going to be there for your birthday.
Well, the plan was like this week, and then a couple weeks ago, you kind of said looked like you were looking at latter part of the month, but obviously there's some circumstances that aren't allowing as things to open up and travel as a lot of us would like. But we'll keep pushing it back, and maybe it'll be around the holidays or something. I don't know.
You just let me know when Radiohead comes back, and we'll link this thing up.
Yeah, we'll do.
Again, he's Tyler J. Batiste, assistant managing editor over sports at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. They say his name Batiste or whatever they pronounce it as up there. For Louisiana versus all y'all, Jarrett Roser.